One execution method was banned forever after just a single use. History is littered with cruel punishments, from public burnings to brutal dismemberments, yet one stands apart for its swift and total rejection. You will learn the full story of this singular horror, a method so extreme it shocked the conscience of an entire era. We will uncover the grim details of the procedure and meet the one person who suffered it. We will explore why a society accustomed to violence drew a line and never crossed it again. How does a civilization decide it has gone too far? To understand the birth of such a method, we must first step into a world where public suffering was a deliberate spectacle. This was an age where the scaffold and the stake were not just tools of justice but instruments of power, designed to instill a deep and lasting fear in the populace. Executions were grand public events, drawing crowds who watched as traitors were hanged, drawn, and quartered in a gruesome choreography of pain. Others faced the searing agony of the pyre, their final moments serving as a stark warning against heresy or treason. These were not acts hidden away. They were meant to be seen, to be heard, and to be remembered. So what kind of political climate would demand a new level of horror beyond these already brutal norms? Often, the answer lies in a state gripped by paranoia. Imagine a ruler or a governing body so terrified of internal revolt that mere death is no longer a sufficient deterrent. They feel the need to erase a person not just physically, but symbolically, to create a story so monstrous it would crush the very spirit of rebellion. It is within this crucible of extreme fear and absolute power that the most unthinkable ideas are forged. The question was never about cruelty for its own sake, but about crafting the ultimate, indelible lesson. What could possibly be worse than being torn apart or burned alive? The answer would redefine the limits of human punishment. The method was known as breaking on the wheel. Its design was a masterpiece of calculated torment, a far cry from the relative speed of an axe or the suffocating burn of smoke. It began with a large, heavy wooden wagon wheel and a sturdy iron bar. The condemned person was stripped and tied, spread-eagled to the ground or a frame. The executioner, wielding the iron bar, would then systematically shatter the bones of the prisoner's limbs. The arms and legs were broken in multiple places, the sound of cracking bone echoing as a stark counterpoint to the victim's screams. The goal was not to kill quickly, but to inflict the maximum amount of pain while keeping the person conscious and aware. After the limbs were reduced to a pulp of fractured bone and torn tissue, the broken body was woven through the spokes of the large wheel. This final act was a grotesque piece of symbolism, the victim lashed into a human wreath of their own shattered form. The wheel was then hoisted atop a tall pole, leaving the individual suspended in the air for all to see. Death did not come swiftly. It was a slow, public unraveling that could take hours or even days. The person would die from a combination of shock, dehydration, exposure to the elements, or the attentions of birds and other animals. This was the method's true innovation in cruelty. It transformed the moment of death from an event into a prolonged spectacle of suffering, a deliberate and public dismantling of a human being that sought to erase their dignity long before it ended their life. The man's name was Robert Francois Damiens. In the biting cold of a Parisian January, he was just an ordinary servant, a face in the crowd, until one single act catapulted him into the center of a national storm. His crime was not a common theft or a murder for personal gain. It was an attack on the very symbol of power itself, King Louis XV. As the king was entering his carriage, Damiens pushed through the guards and stabbed him with a small penknife. The wound was shallow, a mere scratch, and the king recovered fully within days, but the intent was what mattered. Damiens had dared to touch the divine right of kings, and for that, the state demanded a punishment so severe it would echo through the ages. He was not a mastermind of a grand conspiracy, merely a disturbed man whose motives remain debated to this day. Yet he was about to become the sole person in French history to suffer the full, terrible ritual of being broken on the wheel for the crime of regicide. The public reaction was a strange and unsettling mix. Crowds gathered for the spectacle, drawn by a morbid curiosity, but the mood was not one of simple celebration. There were reports of unease, of a growing sense of dread as the day of the execution approached. People understood this was not going to be a standard punishment. This was to be something different, a lesson carved into a living man for all of France to witness. By focusing on this one individual, a servant who committed a largely ineffective act, the abstract horror of the wheel becomes tragically personal. His story forces us to ask a difficult question. Was this unimaginable suffering a just response to a failed assassination attempt, or was it a terrified monarchy lashing out with its most brutal weapon? The air over Paris grew thick with a shared horror that day. Witnesses to the prolonged agony of Robert Francois Damiens did not cheer, they retched. Accounts from the time describe spectators turning away, their faces pale. Even the executioners, men hardened by their grim profession, were reportedly shaken by the sheer intensity of the suffering they were mandated to inflict. This was not the satisfying conclusion of justice that the authorities had envisioned. Instead, the spectacle had backfired, creating a wave of public revulsion that rippled from the streets straight into the halls of power. The very tool designed to cement royal authority had instead painted the monarchy with the brush of monstrous brutality. In the days that followed, an unusual consensus began to form. Prominent philosophers and enlightened members of the aristocracy voiced their disgust, arguing that such methods debased the civilization that employed them. The pressure mounted swiftly, a collective societal gag reflex against the horror it had just witnessed. It was the Parliament of Paris, the high court of the land, that took official action. They did not merely suggest a change, they issued a formal decree. The method of execution by breaking on the wheel for the crime of regicide was banned forever. The speed of this reversal was stunning. A punishment that had existed for centuries, used for various crimes, was now deemed too extreme for the worst crime imaginable, all because of its application on a single man. In one decisive stroke, a line was drawn. The state had looked into the abyss of its own cruelty and chosen to step back. This was not a gradual shift in morals, but a sudden, definitive rejection. Society had collectively declared never again, but this leaves us with a profound question. If this method was banned for being too cruel, what does that say about all the other brutal punishments that remained in use for decades more? So this singular horror leaves us with a complex and unsettling legacy. The brutal method of breaking on the wheel, the single victim Robert Francois Damiens, and the immediate, permanent ban together form a strange and powerful story. It is a stark reminder that even in eras drenched in public violence, a line can be drawn. This event speaks to a profound tension within human society, a struggle between our capacity for unimaginable cruelty and our ability to recognize when we have gone too far. That swift reversal was a moment of collective clarity, a rare instance where a society looked upon its own reflection and chose to change. It proves that moral progress, however slow, is possible. Yet the story also forces us to confront a deeply troubling question. Does the existence of a line that even the past was not willing to cross give you hope, or does the fact that such a method was conceived at all fill you with dread? We want to hear what you think. Where do you believe the true limits of punishment should lie? Share your perspective in the comments below. And if you are drawn to these explorations of history's darkest corners, subscribe for more journeys into the past.